Let's check back in with our old pals the Fleischers. When we last saw them, they had just made their own studio. Fleischer Studio was a big hit right out of the gate. They started with Bimbo the Puppy and Hot Dog in 1930. Now Bimbo was testing alright. Nothing Mickey Mouse levels, but he could easily be the star of the company. That was until he introduced the world to his girlfriend, Betty Boop, who just put Bimbo's numbers to shame. She just tested immediately through the roof. Betty instantly became a household name and immediately got greenlit for her own series. Usually appearing with her boyfriend Bimbo, she starred in huge hits like Minnie the Moocher and Bimbo's Initiation. Neither character reached Mickey Mouse levels of popularity, but Fleischer Studio was doing very well for themselves with this. In 1933, Fleischer released a new character based on a comic strip from Thimble Theater in 1919. This comic strip introduced the world to a certain spinach-loving sailor, and on July 14, 1933, Popeye the Sailor was released to general audiences. Popeye the Sailor immediately became Fleischer's biggest character. The short also introduced us to Bluto and Olive Oyl, all within the context of a Betty Boop cartoon. Unlike Betty and Bimbo, Popeye was actually able to rival Mickey's popularity, and on September 29th of that same year, Fleischer Studios releases I Am What I Am, which kicks off the Popeye series. With Popeye, Bimbo, and Betty Boop rounding out their roster, Fleischer Studios became the main competitor to Disney, and by 1935, polls showed that Popeye was actually more popular than the mouse himself. In 1934, Fleischer tried to make their own version of the Silly Symphonies.
Shut
Known as the Color Classics. This, like every other version of these Silly Symphony clones, fell flat on its face and was shelved in 1941. Despite the Color Classics falling short, Fleischer's biggest problem this decade by far was the production code. A new production code was put in place in 1930, and by 1934 it was finally being enforced. Known as the Hays Codes, this was an attempt to make a series of guidelines for self-censorship that all of Hollywood had to adhere to. It gripped the landscape for the 30s, 40s, and 50s. According to Mutual Film Corporation v. Industrial Commission of Ohio, in 1915 the Supreme Court decided that the freedom of speech did not extend to motion pictures. William H. Hayes was the president of the MPPDA, and because of that, everyone was afraid to stand up to him. The Hayes laws ended up directly impacting the artwork that was coming out of Hollywood for decades to follow. Here's a list of all the don'ts and be carefuls outlined by the Hayes Code. Now, we're not going to read all of them, but I am going to point out a couple. Number 1, pointed profanity. No swear words, especially in relation to the Catholic religion, meaning you cannot make fun of the religion that William Hayes specifically belongs to. Number 11, no willful offense to any nation, race, or creed. This is contradicted by numbers 5 and 6. Number 5 being no white slavery, implying that all other slavery is fine, and number 6 being no misandry, which means no showing a mixed race couple of any kind. Most importantly for Fleischer is number 4, no sexual perversion. Betty Boop is their number 2 character, and she's literally just a series of sexual innuendos. Innuendo. My Nintendo. My Brazilian wax poetic, so pathetically, I don't wanna beat around the bush. With their Hays Codes, their second most popular character just lost all of her punchlines. The Hays Codes were protested all throughout their reign in Hollywood, with cases being brought to the Supreme Court. The Hays Codes were protested all throughout their reign in... God. The Hays Codes were protested all throughout their reign in Hollywood, with protests being brought to the Supreme Court in 1948, 1952, and 1970. I'm reading into the Hays Code a little bit more, and I realized that a lot of my favorite movies just couldn't be made. So, this isn't a list of all of the movies, but I chose a movie for every year since the Hays Code was repealed in 1968, of movies that violated the Hays Code and would not be allowed to be made if the Hays Code were still in effect. In his lifetime, however, there was nothing Fleischer could really do except pull Betty Boop out of the spotlight and swing for the fences on his next project. In 1934, Fleischer learned that Disney was working on his next big project, the first fully animated feature-length film. He went to his distributors at Paramount and asked for a chance to do the same, but Paramount vetoed his idea outright. If they tried to make a movie that big and failed, there wouldn't be a Paramount. The risk was too much. So Fleischer began work on smaller features to prove to Paramount that he was capable of stringing together smaller stories. He ends up producing 3 of these features, each between 16 and 21 minutes. Popeye the Sailor meets Sinbad the Sailor in 1936, Popeye the Sailor meets Alibaba's 40 Thieves in 37, and Aladdin and His Wonderful Lamp in 39. By 1937, animators began to strike to start forming unions. The strike would fail, but Fleischer would move his studio from New York down to Florida, where the state laws would be more favorable to him should the strike happen again. That move pretty much closed out his decade. Christ, it's hot out here. 88 degrees today. What the hell? In 1937, Disney invents the multiplane camera. Now, before this, all animations had the same opaque, solid, one-layer background. What they would do is they would paint one picture, and then they would have all the characters be animated on transparent celluloids. Now, this allowed them to make characters that could move around independent from the background, and that way they don't have to paint the background a million times over. The downside to this is that the background has to be stagnant. There's nothing they could do. The background has to just be flat. What the multiplane camera did was it gave you the ability to make multiple layers, allowing you to push and pull the background in depth. This is totally new and a technique that can't even be used in cinema yet. Disney is now the leading star of animation. Sure, the Silly Symphonies weren't doing as well as they wanted financially, but they were still the gold standard for what animation could be. And even still, Mickey Mouse was such a huge star that the fact that Silly Symphonies didn't make what they wanted it to didn't matter. Mickey Mouse made up for it. They were pioneers in synchronizing sound. They were the first to have color, and they held a monopoly on it for the first 5 years. And now they have this multiplane camera going for them. Now, through the 30s, a lot of companies had something really good going for them. Walter Lantz negotiated a much better contract position. Warner Brothers signed 3 of the best animators ever, including Tex Avery, and they're just getting their start. The Fleischers have a trio that rivals Mickey, Donald, and Goofy. But Disney was uniquely poised to do something that has never been done before. The world's first fully... Disney was...
We are there talking about some very sweltering temperatures, and we've issued a weather alert for that very reason today and tomorrow. We love the beautiful views like the one here along La Push for the coast, also Paulsbo really showing off. But as we reach 90 degrees this afternoon, celebrating Mom, find a shady spot, maybe head into a building with AC if you don't have it at home. If you are cooling off along some of our local waters, lakes, rivers, Puget Sound, remember these water temperatures are dangerously cold, so we need to wear a life vest. 3 reasons for the heat this weekend, that lasting into tomorrow. We've got high pressure overhead that blocks out any storm systems, and this high pressure is relatively strong. We also have what's called a thermal trough, which is a corridor of hot, dry air just parked offshore that's driving the winds to come out of the east. As the air sinks and compresses, it dries out and warms up, and that's exactly why we're talking about the possibility for record-breaking temperatures.
Okay. The world's first feature-length animation. Take it easy. If I get you in a loop when I'm making a point to be straight with you, in lieu of the innuendo, in the endo, my Nintendo, my Brazilian wax poetic. So hypothetically, I don't wanna beat around the bush. Foxtrot, uniform, Charlie, Kilo. Foxtrot, uniform, Charlie.